This is, in fact, the last time that Iran is a world power. It is also remarkably understudied, both in Iranian historiography as well as Western historiography. Why would that be? I think it's because of the dynastic model. We think of periods of history, both in Iranian academic circles as well as Western academic circles, as really being started and ended with a dynastic period. So the Safavids, that is a unit of periodization in this model. The Qajars, that is a unit of periodization in this model. And the 18th century doesn't have this. You have the fall of the Safavids, and then until the end of that century, you don't have another stable, strong, enduring dynasty. So you have a period of chaos, it seems. The 18th century, quote-unquote, interregnum. What I'm going to be arguing here is that despite falling in this chasm, this historiographic chasm, this is a remarkably important and seminal period of Islamic as well as Iranian history. So let us recap what has gone on in the preceding 2 centuries, prior to the 18th century. We see that across these 200 years, you have a successful conversion of the majority of the population to Shiism. And you have the increasing integration of the Shia ulama, the juristic-minded scholars of the Twelver Shia faith, in Safavid politics and government. This is Muhammad Baqir al-Majlisi, who is one of the greatest minds in Shi'i theology. He was a 17th century, 18th century scholar, and he oversaw not just a great deal of theological research and compilation of hadiths, the Bahar al-Anwar, so on and so forth, but he was a politician, a statesman. He was a very important advisor to the Shah. And the way that he enters into politics and stays in politics is emblematic of how his class is integrated at the very heart of Safavid power and administration. More and more lands that belonged to the Safavid crown were siphoned off and given to these ulama as endowments. In fact, this is a broader trend that you see with Safavid decentralization, with the elites holding more and more power and an increasingly anemic center. Of course, because they have such a great stake in the state, they start to legitimate it. They're very much identified with it. And for the first time, they offer robust theological treatises that are supposed to prove the legitimacy of the Safavid state. And in the early 18th century, this is taken from a treatise, the Tuhfe Firuziyeh. This is by a cleric that is a high-ranking official and a scholar that attends the Safavid court. And he binds Safavid Iran and Shi'ism and notions of legitimate rule all together in his narrative of the past 200 years. Finally, the radiant sun of the Safavid kings shone upon Iran. It was only then that the condition of Iran's Shia was ameliorated in line with what they deserve, and the Safavids succeeded in infusing Shi'ism, faith, wisdom, and other aspects of the religion of the faithful into the hearts of the Iranian Shia. This notion that the Iranians were almost set out from the very beginning, preordained to be Shia, and the Safavids as their deliverers, their saviors. I already talked about how the Safavid state is increasingly anemic as it's giving more and more autonomy to its grand notables, emirs, viziers, the ulema, many other kind of mercantile families that are establishing connections with one another, the guilds. And these tax exemptions, these fiefdoms and appanages take more and more of the economy out of the tax base. They take more and more resources out from under the central administration of the state. And the state, by the 18th century, is not gathering all that much in terms of revenue and resources. It is unable to respond to major challenges that lay ahead in the early 18th century. And there are many. What you have in the periphery are people who don't fit in to the confessional and religious makeup of the Safavid elites as well. One of these communities are the Afghans, and this is another period of major importance for Afghan history, because you have the establishment of Afghan empires and a distinct kind of notion of Ile Durrani, or the exalted Duranid clan, that is supposed to look over a collection of Afghan peoples, this kind of new discourse of Afghan identity that is very much rooted in Sunni identity. But at this time, what they're doing is trying to break free from the Safavids at a moment of weakness. This is mirrored by other predominantly Sunni clans in the periphery breaking away from the Safavid center. In the south, you have various Arab sheikhs in the Persian Gulf that are breaking away and raiding into the Safavid heartland. The Afghans are doing the same. The Dagestanis in the North Caucasus, they're doing the same. The Kurdish emirs in Adalan in the west, they are also doing the same. So there are these pressures from the periphery onto the center, and the center does not have the resources to respond. Eventually, what these Afghan clans realize is that they can not only wrest control of the periphery, and here you see examples of the Galgai Afghans, one of the major clans of the Afghans, wrest control of Kandahar, a major city in the east, but another clan, the Abdali Afghans, take over Herat. So all of these major cities in the east are falling, and more time goes by, and rather than successful reconquests, you see further, how should I put this, further signals from the center that it is unable to muster any counterattack, and therefore inviting greater aggression. Now, what this means is that the Afghans grow ambitious, and they are, in this period, a host of raiders and warriors that are unparalleled in the East. Whether you're a Mughal imperial army or you are an Iranian imperial army, you want to have alliances with these people when you go on campaign. They make for excellent infantry musketeers as well as horsemen. And now that they're independent, they build new coalitions to raid into the center of the Safavid Empire. And they find that they are eventually able to overthrow it. They not only defeat the main Safavid imperial army, but they lay siege to Isfahan. Now, Isfahan was placed under siege for 6 months. And in the duration of those 6 months, not one singular attempt is made to relieve the capital city. This speaks to the paralysis of Safavid state and society in this period, that the imperial capital could be besieged for over half a year and no response is mustered in the periphery. In fact, the periphery itself, as this map shows, comes under pressure from neighboring empires. These are the traditional rivals to the west, the Ottomans, as well as a new rising empire of Peter the Great, Russia, in the north. Here you see the black borders signify the old imperial frontiers of the Safavid Empire at the beginning of the 18th century. In the middle, that line, that bounded kind of territory, is the newly carved Afghan Hotakid Empire. To the north, the green is supposed to demark all of the northern provinces annexed by Peter the Great, and to the west, the lion's share of the conquest is gone to the Ottoman Empire that finally manages to annex most of southern Azerbaijan, the Caucasus, and western Iran. So here you have the Afghans establish themselves at the heart of Iran. And this is remarkably humiliating for the predominantly Shia elites of Iran, but the new Afghan overlords, rather than see themselves as mere clansmen on the frontier, begin to articulate an imperial rhetoric. They have a program of conquering all of the former territories of the empire and themselves becoming kings of Iran. That is why they're very clear in their propaganda if you will, discourse, that they are the new shahs of Iran. You see this in the numismatic prints and the royal mints that they issue. The first one is the royal mint of Shah Hussein. Shah Hussein is the last Safavid ruler that is overthrown. The royal mint of Shah Hussein has been vanquished. In the end, it is Mahmud, the first Hotakid Shah, which became the Shah of Iran. This is the first time after the fall of the Sasanian Empire in antiquity that you have a royal mint that mentions explicitly the word Iran. And quite in contrast with Iranian nationalist historiography that identifies the Afghan completely as the other, ethnically, racially, and nationally, what you have here is the first attestation of an Iranian political identity on numismatic prints coming from an Afghan dynasty. It really speaks to the notion that Iran in this realm is still an imperial domain. It is first and foremost an imperial identity. And various people can reach out and impose a new dynastic order onto that imperial realm. It is by no means an ethnic or national or linguistic identity here. The other one, rising from the east of Iran, he minted coin like the disk of the ascendant sun, that world-conquering Shah Mahmud of exalted lineage. Again, ironically, when the Afghans come to the center, they look back to Kandahar and their old homelands, and they kind of put that in the orbit of this new empire that they're trying to consolidate power over. They're identifying it as the eastern approaches of a much vaster Iranian imperial realm. Now that they're at the center, the old homeland becomes the periphery. All of the dominions of Iran are supposed to be under the control of the Hotakid dynasty. Needless to say, the predominantly Shi'i elites of the former Safavid Empire are none too happy with this vision of Iran. For them, for pretty much 2 centuries, they have integrated and enmeshed a Shi'i and Iranian identity into one. For them, Iran is a distinctly Shia imperial space. So for them, it's unacceptable that a Sunni could hold dominion over the imperial throne of Iran. Such a thing would not only be contradictory and inconceivable, but it would be profanely inconceivable. So there's a sacral element here that is being rejected. And you see this amongst various social classes. You see this amongst the military classes, the emirs. You see this amongst the bureaucrats, the grand viziers. You see it amongst court officials and literati. They pen various divans and poems about this, as well as the ulema. They want to get away from this model that the Hotakids are trying to impose on Iran. There's this notion that Shia sovereignty has to be restored, and they are duty-bound. It's a sacred duty to restore that Shia sovereignty. But there isn't any consensus on who actually gets to restore that kind of sovereignty. There are some who say, let's just bring back the Safavid Empire. Many, however, have kind of passed the Safavid Empire and believe that the Safavids were actually the cause of their predicament. So there needs to be a new Shia dynasty. And this atmosphere of millenarianism and apocalyptic angst has taken over amongst these elites. Increasingly, they're making a beseechment for the Shia imams, the Mahdi, to appear and or designate a savior and place him on the Iranian throne. So the Mukafatnameh is actually from a former Safavid official who has nothing really kind to say about the state that he was a part of. He very clearly rejects Safavid authority and goes directly to the Shia imams, beseeching them to place someone from their lineage, someone else from their lineage, onto the throne. Bequeath the throne to one of your own household. Seat upon it one endowed with wisdom, meaning the Safavids were not endowed with wisdom. Vanquish each and every evil oppression, predominantly the Afghans, but also the Ottomans and other Sunni powers that had gained dominion in Iran. Let the clouds of mercy rain upon Iran. And another person, Nadim, who worked in a provincial court in the northeast, he's making similar kind of millenarian beseechments. It is clear from the tumult of the age that there is nothing for me in this dynasty, referring to the Safavids. I was retainer to the Shahs of the age. Alas, I cannot accept any state other than that of the Master of Time, Sahib al-Zaman, the Mahdi, the 12th Imam, he who will come at the end of time and usher in a universal age of peace. He shall answer the call of the captives in Persia, the master, Sahib of Iran, Shah of Justice, that commander of the faithful, referring to the first of the Imams, Ali. So there is this kind of new notion of sovereignty being directly associated with the Imams, and the Safavids being driven to the periphery. And it's in this context that you have truly unprecedented notions of political legitimacy and just government. This is the first time in Iranian history that you have clear articulations for a constitutional monarchy. This crisis really leads to the development of new streams of thought in political kind of philosophy and understanding. One of my favorite authors and agitators in this period is a Sufi sheikh who led the Zahabiyya order, a very popular and widespread Sufi order in Iran at the time. And he has these very interesting notions of reviving tashayyu' al-Iraniyya. And he writes, of course, predominantly in Arabic, the language of the learned ulama. This notion of tashayyu' al-Iraniyya really puts an emphasis on not just restoring Shia sovereignty, but the role of the ulama and the wider public, the jumhur, in re-establishing that sovereignty. He articulates a new call for the Tib al-Mamalik, the medicine of empires. In this political treatise, he sets out his vision for a constitutional monarchy, an election, if you will, of the monarch by the Sufi ulama and the people. So this is something of an in-between position. He's asking for the ulama to congregate and to choose a Safavid Shah, a new Safavid Shah, to elect one, but nonetheless to do so under a constitutional structure, such that they will hold him to task and impose on the monarch and the government that he leads various tenets of governance, and we'll go to very soon what exactly he's asking for in the constitution. You ulama must hold a selection, qur'a, from among the princes of the Safavid dynasty, electing one of them by unanimous consensus, and on the basis of Ali's teachings, the Nahj al-Balagha, which is a compilation of kind of mystical teachings by the first Imam, to extract a treaty, mithaq, from the Shah, which will be adhered to by the Shah, us, the ulama, and the people. So it is truly a constitutional document that he's envisioning. And why is it a constitution? Precisely because collecting tribute, organizing the fight against the enemies, and attending to the flourishment of the provinces, you must gain from the Shah a mithaq, written oath, which will govern according to the order, dastur, of Imam Ali on matters such as caliphate, emirate, governing of the provinces, how to deal with inhabitants, how to organize them into guilds and classes, which include the sacred army, the scribes and bureaucrats, who deal with letters public and private, and the officials of the judiciary and magistrates who dispense justice, the affairs of the dhimmis, you could think of them as the non-Shia, non-Muslim communities, and those who paid the jizya tax, as well as the Muslim peoples, the merchants, guildsmen and artisans, the class of the poor and the dervishes, and those in need, and also how to organize the tax officials, how to form advisory councils, to administer and equip the army, to engage in espionage. All these affairs are included also. These should be organized as laid down in the Nahj al-Balagha. He's using the sayings, the mystical sayings of Ali, as a kind of a pool from which to construct a constitutional form of imperial state. These aren't going to happen according to the whims of the Shah, the councils, or the notables. These are going to be set down, agreed to, and written down in a constitutional document that will be signed and adhered to by all the major classes within the empire, including the people, al-Nas. He finishes, it is necessary on the basis of this treaty, Mu'ahida, to draft a document, kitab, binding him, the Shah, us, the ulama, and the ru'aya, the people, and to dispatch this to all the provinces of the empire, such that this kind of regulatory and prescriptive document will be adhered to across the imperial dominions. So this is truly a constitution. I'm not using constitution in a very loose and lax kind of way here. I think it speaks for itself. And it is in this kind of context that people feel that there is a breakdown of authority, and they feel themselves able to articulate new and radically different notions of political legitimacy, perhaps even put themselves forward, if they're strong men or very ambitious, for the rulership of Iran. One of these people comes from the northeast, Khorasan, which is one of the places that the Afghans, the Ottomans, and the Russians haven't penetrated into, and becomes a hotbed for small and petty margraves and lords to squabble over who's going to be the new Shah of Iran. And there is a Mahmud Nameh, a kind of chronicle in verse that is written in this periphery that identifies Mahmud, a strongman, a local Sistani strongman, as a new possible ruler of Iran. And here, I think, in some of the verses, it's very obvious that to be Iranian is to be Shi'i. So there's that rejection of Afghan Sunni authority, there's that visceral rejection of Ottoman encroachment onto the sacred Shia space of Iran, and a re-emphasis of the Shi'iness of Iranianness. And you see it in the poetry, in the treatises, in the thought, and in the rhetoric of these elites. The Iranians are beholden to me since ages past, and as I am a Shi'i, they will in sincerity all come together in my support. So this is the new distinct political community to which they belong. A community that believes itself to be bounded and tied to the sacred soil of imperial Iran. And this sacred soil needs to be protected and guarded against any profane, foreign, Sunni aggression, whether it be Afghan or Ottoman. Of course, the Safavids recognize that political discourse has shifted radically. So they need to re-emphasize and kind of construct this new history that from the very beginning, we were the most able and the most contumacious of Iranian rulers and sovereigns. We were the saviors of this land and this people. Whereas Shah Ismail would recognize nothing about this. There was nothing about Iran or even the Iranian people in his divan or his discourse. This was something that was later added on and slowly integrated by his successor and his later descendants. But this 18th century letter by Tahmasp, who was a renegade prince that was trying to re-establish his father's dynasty, it's clear that he's trying to rebind the Safavid dynasty with the notion of Iran and its people anew. It is clear that for centuries, all the people of Iran have had their eyes transfixed upon the grace offered by the exalted Safavid dynasty. He's identifying that savior that everyone's calling for, with his own lineage and with his own person. And he has the misfortune of meeting a very charismatic lord who becomes his vassal and eventually his general-in-chief, his commander-in-chief. This is the big personality of the 18th century. Recall Timur. This is the Timur of the age. And in fact, he ties himself in various esoteric ways with the legacy of Timur. Nader, as the name kind of implies, prodigy, rarity, is an extraordinary person. Despite coming from very humble origins, he is able to convince many petty lords and margraves, including Tahmasp, a Safavid Shah, to hand over de facto command over this restoration movement. And what eventually happens is that he manages to oust the Afghans from the Safavid Empire. This is a period of radical change, not just in political philosophy, but also in military matters. He adopts very disciplined, very well-trained infantry musketeers, backed up with equally disciplined artillery units and new tactics and administrative kind of structures to form a robust military system that not only manages to oust the Afghans and to re-establish Tahmasp on the throne, but also to march west and reconquer a lot of the lost dominions that the Ottomans had grabbed in Iran. He is a very opportunistic fellow. So when he goes back east to his home province of Khorasan, the newly ensconced prince, Tahmasp, decides that, well, Nader is winning all of these battles, now he has all of this prestige and legitimacy, let me try my hand at a little bit of military conquest, and let me go against the Ottomans. And this is a terrible mistake. He loses very badly, he is defeated, and he's forced to enter into a remarkably humiliating and ignoble peace treaty, and he gives up territory. Nader uses this as an opportunity to call for war. And eventually, in the interest of the dowlat-e Iran, the Iranian state, he deposes Tahmasp and makes him vakil-ud-dawla, the deputy of the state. This also speaks to the changing notion of dowlat, of the state. The state is no longer really identified with the dynasty. It is entirely conceivable to overthrow and depose the dynasty in the maslahat al-dawlat, in the interest of the state. There's the abstraction of the state. And this is precisely what Nader uses to wrest control from the Safavid dynasty. This is it seems, an early modern kind of development, not just in Iran, but the wider world. The notion that a monarch, a king, could be a traitor. Previously, that would be inconceivable, because a monarch, a king, the dynast, would be at the very heart of political loyalty. How could he possibly commit treason? Against what and who? Against himself? But now, it's the state that is the object of loyalty. Nader marches west. Nader dupes the Russians out of the northern provinces that they've captured while winning one victory after another against the Ottomans. By the end of 1735, he's won a truly astonishing series of victories, and he's able to position himself at the very zenith of his prestige as a possible candidate for the throne. He never says this explicitly. He calls a qurultai, a grand assembly, and he says, now that I've conquered back all of the dominions in the interest of the Iranians and the state of Iran, I'm going to retire back to my kind of frontier castle on the east. What I need you guys to do is to elect a king to rule over all of these territories. I need to put this in the hands of a worthy custodian. So elect amongst yourselves, or even from the Safavids, one that you deem worthy. because I am going to retire, and you can't elect me. Clearly, they can only elect him. He is the only viable candidate. But it's not just dressing. It's not just a matter of rhetoric. These really kind of signal radical changes in possibility for new elites who come from very humble backgrounds. Nader is emblematic of this. He comes from the most humble background that you can imagine, the son of a shepherd on the frontiers. And he's entering into the elite class. He's entering into the elite class and eventually all the way up to that of imperial sovereign, the position of the imperial sovereign. And he's being followed in this upward kind of socially mobile movement with many of his generals, many of his allies, all forms of bureaucrats, emirs, and viziers that are dislodging the old established elites and moving into the upper rungs of state power. And they're doing this by legitimating it in the name of the Iranian people. And that is the foundation for the legitimacy of this state. You can quite clearly see it in the imperial seal. The imperial seal is a very important seal because every single major state document, edict, decree, diplomatic letter bears this imperial seal. No matter where you are in the empire, if you have a document of the state, you will see the seal affixed atop of it. So it's a very clear way to understand what is at the heart of the identity and ideological discourse of the state. And what do you find? You find the following bait couplet in Persian. The hallowed seal of state and faith had been torn asunder in disgrace. Yet God did restore the seal in the Iranian Nader's embrace. نگین دولت و دین رفته بود چون از جا به نام نادر ایران قرار داد خدا. The notion of state and faith as inextricably linked. The travesty of state and faith being broken and the divinely ordained saviour restoring it. This is also something that is reflected, this Iranianness is reflected in the numismatic and the royal mints that are issued after the coronation. What do you have? He struck his name upon gold and the sultanship of the world for all to know. He is the singular Nader of Iran realm and world-conquering Khosrow. The notion that the Iranianness of Nader is at the very heart of his legitimacy and imperial identity. And of course, when he is elected, what is the form of the election? The form of the election is a classically Turco-Mongol Kurultai or Grand Assembly of notables, but these notables view themselves and describe themselves as the people of Iran, not even the representatives of the people of Iran, but the actual people of Iran. This discourse, this strange discourse on popular sovereignty is striking. I'll read from the document that is the coronation deed of Nader. After we had forsaken hope, and this is we the people of Iran, the perspective that is being written from, and the dust of hopelessness had settled upon the heads of all the people of Iran, then the Lord sent forth his appointed one, Nader, who dawned from Khorasan and scattered the darkness which had shrouded the fate of the oppressed. And it gives an account of how he restored the Khak-e Iran, the soil of Iran, the territorial integrity of the realm, and kicked out the profane, non-Shia enemies of the Iranian people. And the affairs of the realm were put in order. All the people of the Iranian realm, whether noble or common, elder or younger, wise or ignorant, Turk or Tajik, great or small, were summoned here to the plain of Mogan. Now, the number of grand notables that attended, we think maybe around 20,000, but in the official documents and the records and the chronicles, there is such a strong emphasis that no, it wasn't just the notables, everyone, all the people of Iran, great or small, elder or younger, wise or ignorant, Turk or Tajik, all of them were present. There's this emphasis that the people as a whole elected Nader to the kingship. And he asked them, Nader asked the people of Iran, to appoint a man to the sultanship either from the Safavid dynasty or from any group we wish. We, the people of Iran, concluded that we have suffered all that we have because of the fires of sedition stoked by the Safavid state, which forsook the frontiers to the enemy and abandoned us to our wretched faith. Again, what you see here is the emphasis on the territorial integrity and the sacredness of the imperial realm of Iran. So the Safavids failed in that, and that is what causes the passing of consensus from the Safavid to the new Naderid dispensation. And it's the people. It's not just divinely ordained. It is legitimacy is arising from the bottom, from the people to the sovereign, as well as being conferred by the divine onto the sovereign. Forsook the frontiers to the enemy and abandoned us to our wretched faith. They proved unable to guard and secure us. We were only granted our freedom, Azad Kardeh, by that blessed Lord Nader, who saved us from the clutches of the enemy, breathing new life into our decrepit bodies. So, quite clearly, the reviver, the restorer, the savior. Thus, we all did willingly, vocally, and unanimously elect ikhtiyar, him to the sultanship. We pledged to abrogate our servitude to the Safavid dynasty, renouncing them and their seditious ways. This is an absolutely unprecedented document in Islamic and Iranian history. I've not seen any kind of document that so explicitly uses the language of popular sovereignty. And of course, the state that emerges from this is a profoundly strong, muscular, and centralized state. Nader has no qualms about abrogating all of the tax exemptions. He's taking away all of the appanages and the fiefdoms. The Safavids had kind of disintegrated their authority and decentralized it. Nader does the precise opposite. He spreads his bureaucratic apparatus and military apparatus all across the dominions of Iran. In his mind, all of Iran Zamin, Iran realm, is to be ruled directly. Even the private letters of local bureaucrats and officials are brought under centralized supervision. Taxes go up. Places that have not been taxed previously, they are taxed. Tax exemptions, forget about it. Even if you've paid your tax, Nader might just come and annex, as in expropriate, all of your rich estates. If you rebel, that is the perfect kind of excuse and pretext that he needs. Even if you don't rebel, he will come up with the pretext to centralize all of the resources under his robust and burgeoning administration. I think, as far as I've read, this is perhaps the most centralized state on the Iranian plateau prior to the rise of a modern nation state with technologies and apparatus of modernity, the industrialized capacity to centralize. And of course, all of these resources are put towards his war machine. His war machine was already impressive, now it becomes an unstoppable juggernaut, and he needs it. Because what is he doing? It's all about conquest. In his ideological view, the entirety of the Islamic world is composed of 4 major imperial realms. Of course, he identifies Iran as the first and foremost of these realms, and then comes Rome, the Ottoman Empire, and then Hindustan under the Mughals, as well as, of course, the traditional enemy beyond the Oxus, Turan or Turkestan. And his notion is that Iran is a heartland of this universal empire, and he establishes these new campaigns that are supposed to reintegrate all of the Islamic world under one imperial order, with him at the very top. He develops a dynastic kind of supraclan, and he says the rulers of these 4 dominions are part of the Ile Jalil Turcoman, the exalted Turkmenid dynasty. This is not an ethnic identity by any stretch of the imagination. This is a dynastic notion. And he is the Bozorg-e-il, the elder of the clan. So as the elder, he confers crowns on the rulers of Hindustan, Rome, and Turan. He is the master, and they are his clients. These are lesser brothers. These are junior brothers in the clan. So you have the authority of the Shahanshah emanating from Iran onto the rest of the Turkmenid dynasts, who are the junior brothers of the Turkmenid dynasty. He's binding together this kind of imperial structure that he's spreading all across the world. And of course, this map is an idealized version of the frontiers of the maps. Once he defeats the Mughal Indians and once he defeats the Turanians, he has notions of the mytho-historical frontiers, the natural frontiers of Iran. So he's engaged in an irredentist campaign to re-establish the Oxus as the Eastern Territory, as well as the Indus as the Southeastern Territory, and the Euphrates as the Western Territory. And beyond that, he collects tribute. He rules indirectly. This is the extent of his imperial conquests. This is one of the largest empires in history. In fact, it is technically larger than even the Achaemenid dynasty in antiquity, certainly much larger than the Sasanians. This remarkably capacious territory is ruled directly within the Iranian confines, beyond that, indirectly through vassals. And there are various ways of collecting tribute. There are various ways of collecting tribute because Hindustan it's remarkably rich, probably the richest region in the world in this period, bar maybe China. They send cash, gold, precious stones like diamonds and rubies and so on. When it comes to the Central Asian Khanates in Turan and Turkestan, they're not as rich, but they have plenty of excellent fighters who can be drafted as auxiliary forces for the imperial army. So they mostly send manpower. In Oman, it's various other forms of resources. Forms of resources such as slaves, but also primarily things such as, what is morvarid? Pearls. So pearls come from Oman. Various territories send different kinds of tribute to the heartland. But tribute in Iran is cancelled. Nader is only interested in one thing and one thing alone: taxes. Forget about tribute. Direct administration. And the four-gourd cap that he wears signifies his imperial sovereignty, universal sovereignty over the Islamic world. If you look at the cap, it has four corners, and those corners signify Iran, Rome, Turan, and Hindustan. So, king of the four corners of the world. I should re-emphasize here that Iranian in this context is such a far cry from the national identity that is constructed in the 20th century by the Pahlavi regime. The Pahlavis have a kind of Eurocentric notion of national identity. And for them, Persian is an ethnicity and also a linguistic core to which all the other minorities, another distinctly Western notion, are supposed to be assimilated into and integrated into. This is not the case in the 18th century. This is an imperial identity, and people from various clans and lineages are part and parcel of this. Innumerous clans and lineages are describing themselves, or at least the elites in there, describe themselves as Iranians. And they are multilingual. This is an intensely multilingual society. The two most important languages, of course, are Persian and Turkish. In fact, in this period, you have the Shahnameh that is being recited in mostly what language? Persian, but also Turkish. Just 5 years after the death of Nader, we have a kind of recitational scroll of the Shahnameh, and the language is Qizilbash Turkish. In it, it attests to a very jingoistic Iranian identity, and it does so in Turkish, One of the couplets it comes from Salman Nariman, one of the Iranian heroes of the Shahnameh, and after stealing the daughter, the princess of the Turanian Shah, he tells him, "Qizin yanimda," your daughter is at my side. I have taken your daughter. You either accept this, or I will invade your realm and completely destroy it. The couplet is, "Tashay khak Turan Iran man." I will bring back the soil of Tehran back to Iran as war booty. Dilar berg chinlari Iran vatan. And I will bring back the battle standards of Turk and China, Turan, back to the homeland, Iran. This is a very jingoistic, aggressive notion of Iranian identity. But here, it is being expressed in Kizilbash Turkish. And you have the same happen in Kurdish. You have the same happen in a variety of other languages, including Arabic. And that's something that is so different from nationalistic notions of Iran developed in the 20th century. Because the primary other in Pahlavi discourse, national discourse, is who? It is the Arab. It is the Semitic Arab that is contrasted with the Persian itself. That just does not have any kind of influence or place in this kind of thinking at all. This is a pre-national imperial identity that is intensely multilingual, that sees itself as hailing from a variety of different lineages, and there isn't any kind of center, so to speak, and it's definitely not Perso-centric. Hindustan is a distinctly much more Persianate realm and culture than Iran at the time. We have to really decouple an ethno-linguistic kind of association and connotation with Iran in this period. This is a connotation that is made in the 20th century by Iranian nationalists. The Persianate world was far, far more expansive than Iran. Iran was a relatively peripheral and, in terms of money, wealth, and power, unimportant section of the Persianate world. India, by far, I would say, is the heart of the Persianate realm and the Persianate sphere in the early modern and really the medieval period as well. The Iranian elites are none too impressed after a good few years with this discourse on Iranian identity. They love the conquests, but they don't see themselves as really sharing in the fruits of conquest. And we talked about the aggressive centralization. All of their estates and fiefdoms and appanages have been expropriated by the Naderid state. They are much poorer. They are no longer really hereditary lords in the old sense of the word. They've been reduced to mere employees of the Naderid Empire. This is unacceptable for them, especially when they see the increasing power of the empire and they contrast it with their diminishing role and authority and autonomy in the empire. After a while, they band together and start a series of rebellions against Nader, and they actually use the discourse on Iranian identity against Nader. They say that Nader is a turncoat, Nader is the killer and betrayer of the Iranian people, and through this discourse, they want to oust Nader and to re-establish a decentralized kind of state in which they regain all of those appanages, fiefdoms, and control over resources that the Safavid state had kind of devolved to their charge. After the demise of Nader, you have the ongoing notion of it is the people of Iran that elect their sovereign. So the landlords and guildsmen and artisans and clerical families and emirs in the northeast, in Khorasan, band together again and really bring a Safavid scion, a member of the Safavid extended family, to elect as their king. And you can tell from their coronation treaty what is the concern that they have. It reveals a great deal. The purpose of drafting this treaty is as follows. Since the Afghans gained dominion over Iran and the Safavid Shah was martyred, again, Safavids are the good guys all of a sudden again, the Lord Nader expunged the realm of Iran from their presence. But then he, Nader, deposed Shah Tahmasp through guile and treason. Now, it's not Tahmasp doing the treason anymore. Nader is committing treason against the Iranians, himself seizing the sultanship of Iran. During his reign, he engaged in all manner of excess and oppression, sundering the clans from their old homelands and bringing ruination to the dominions of Iran. He stripped life, limb, wealth, honor, and dignity from the people of Iran. He is not the savior. He is the oppressor of the people. And it's really the people that are the central concern and object of loyalty in this political discourse and this language. Suffering under his extortionate levies and innumerable exactions, really, they're not concerned what he did with the people. These elites, they're concerned that he took away their lands, their appanages, their exemptions, all of the privileges, fiscal and administrative and governmental, that he had stripped from them. But the language and kind of discourse of politics requires them to couch it in terms of the public interest. It is the people that were oppressed. Read, it's us that were oppressed. Eventually it comes to, we accepted Nader's grandson as Shah since his maternal lineage at least tied him to the Safavid dynasty, thinking that we may edify him, tarbiyat, that he may come to possess discernment and wisdom, so that he may assuage the injuries visited upon the people, and correct the sins of his father or grandfather, Nader Shah. Ultimately, however, it became apparent to all that due to his young age, weakness and incompetence in eloquence and lack of both talent and experience, he could not take on such a task. And the foundation of the state, against the abstraction of the state, the importance of the state in and of itself, separate from a dynasty, itself may altogether collapse, and God forbid this will invite our enemies to transgress against the lives, property, and honor of all the people of God, referring to the people of Iran. So they themselves are judging who is worthy and who is not worthy of kingship. It's not just a divinely ordained matter. It doesn't go back just purely to your lineage. You have to be elected bil-irth wal-ithiqa. According to lineage, sure, but bil-istiqa, according to worthiness, as judged by us, the people. And that's exactly what they say, judged to be in all aspects worthy of kingship. And the people of Iran have made repeated requests for him to take up the mantle of the sultanship. For if, God forbid, he should refuse our request and thus deprive the people of his sovereignty, then all our lives, wealth, honor, and families will be forfeited. And throughout the 18th century, you have this notion of popular sovereignty and public interest and the abstract notion of the Iranian state come back and be part and parcel of the political language and discourse. Karim Khan, another local dynast in Western Iran, identified himself not as the Shah, but he just uses the term Vakilul Khalaiq or Vakilul Raya, the deputy of the people. So you exercise sovereignty increasingly in the 18th century with reference not to divinely ordained sovereignty, but popularly mandated sovereignty. You are loyal to the people of the realm. And that realm is a sacral space, inhabited by a sacred community, infused with notions of Shi'ism. And that brings us to the end of this talk. Goodbye.